there's only so many people in the market that are budget qualified that are actually looking. And it's like, how do you address the larger portion of that pie, whether it's however big you think it is, 90%, 80% of the rest of your audience? They're not ready yet. Wing It Podcasts, goosedigital.com, episode 54. Who do we have?
Robin Kroll.
Chris O'Neill. Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. All right. Welcome back.
Hey guys.
Hello.
We're using this time wisely, banging out our content strategy, just like every one of our listeners should be doing. This one's interesting. This one's going to be kind of like, I think, a misnomer, because customer journeys is what we're talking about. And I think normally you think of customer journeys as like a never ending thing, but I think a lot of people think of customer journeys as like the nurture campaign, or, you're designing out something that is basically going to end at some point. I mean, it's not going to go on forever. I don't know that we've seen too many journey maps that just go indefinitely. So we want to talk about what happens when the customer journey that you're designing is over. And we got a couple of cool ways to approach this one. So Kev, why don't you kick it off, just because I know you banged out like the outline, and then we'll go around the table here.
Yeah, sure. The journeys are great. And it's interesting. We've been in a lot of conversations with clients and prospects about launching journeys, anything from new leads to old lead re-engagement to even customer journeys, and what do those look like once they've done some initial business with our clients. And so I think, to me, it's always about, you're going to go put some thoughtful plans into how do we engage a particular audience. But then what? Whether the drip is a month long or 2 months, and there's all these touches and everything, it's sort of, at some point it will end, and there's got to be a kind of a perpetual marketing plan, if you will, for what you do after. And so the high level, to me, is there's really three outcomes in a nurture campaign. I think outcome one, the ideal outcome, is the lead or customer does that thing that we exactly as marketers want them to do. They book a meeting with your sales rep. They say, I'm interested in a phone call. They do that thing, and that's great. That's usually not the greatest percentage of the audience doing that. It's usually probably the smallest, but we know what to do there. We automate, or we coordinate effectively to say, okay, sales will chase down those interested parties. Great, we know what to do. But then there's the two other groups, and this is where the bulk of the attention really goes, is some of that audience will be kind of engaged, sort of engaged, and then some of the audience will just have no engagement at all. And so that's where marketers got to go back and scratch their heads and say, what do we do now? But the principal amount of attention will be on that middle group, where it's, okay, we see some engagement, we've got lead scoring going on, we're tracking the touch points and what they're doing. And so I think the now what is really answered by, how do we continue to engage those individuals? Because they probably represent your next sales meeting for your sales team. And so that's sort of I guess we'll tee it off there, Mike, and say that's how we're thinking about nurture streams on today's episode.
Yeah. And I think we can maybe get Robin to weigh in a bit on some of the audience stuff that she's been doing, and just sort of sizing up an audience generally. If you think of your marketing campaign before you kind of map the journey out, you just said there's going to be three kind of broad outcomes, right? And that top outcome, or I guess you might call it the bottom outcome, or the least effective outcome, is going to be you're going to have a lack of engagement. That'll be a big pool, most likely, because that's just kind of how this stuff tends to flow. And I think, we've invested a lot of money to kind of move through this exercise, right, Robin? I mean, we bought lists, and we've sized up audiences on the digital landscape, and we've poured all this money in to get them into our funnel. We've generated 1,000 quote unquote, responses through this program, only to have 60% of them, for example, have no engagement. So I want to talk maybe just a little bit about that process first, and then we can dive kind of what you might consider to be more like that middle of the funnel concepts.
Sure. So you're right. You have invested a lot, and I'm thinking also, all the time and thought that goes into the creative and the messaging, and you're really focused on that best case outcome, Kev, as you described, and that's really the smallest percentage. So you can be left a little bit deflated, saying, "Well, we tried our best, but now what do we do with this group?" And one of the things that we often see is that, well, nothing's done, right? We tried our best, and well, okay, that group is
Just leave
not,
it.
they're not interested in our product or service. Maybe they're not the right person, so that they get left. So one other thing that it's not often, it's sometimes missed in building out a journey, is that while you're focused on that outcome, building in opportunities to learn about that base along the way. So capturing additional information. So asking things like industry or geography, or, I'm thinking if you're engaging with an organization, finding out, is this someone who has a decision maker type of title or an influencer? Now, that section of your customers who don't engage at all, maybe they're not going to fill in any of those additional data gaps, but you know what? Those people that have engaged partially or went through the entire flow, chances are that they've engaged. So that means that you're picking up bits of information that you can then go ahead and say, well, let's see how I can then apply it to that group that didn't engage at
Hmm.
all. Let me try a different tactic. Let me use language or content or creative that maybe speaks to that group that was more highly engaged, and maybe that's another way to drive awareness from this group. So I would say that that's definitely an opportunity.
I think the learning part of your point is really salient, Robin. Like, it's true. Like, in absence of actual results comes the understanding of results. And I think, you know, when you start these processes, it's everything always comes back to a funnel, and that's certainly like a big sort of vision that we champion. But I think you have to understand if it's the example that Mike gave, which is you have this list, whether you purchase the list, you've I don't know acquired it over time through programs and subsequent other efforts, but how many of these names or these individuals do you have to put into a campaign, and how many emails do you have to send in order to sort of understand various levels of intent and need? I think it all goes somewhere, right? Like, you have to understand each of those stages and how many emails you have to send before one thing happens, before another does. So I think that's right. And hopefully you can incrementally improve that performance over time. And then at some point get to a place where you can say, we understand the steps required to actually drive a conversion, however conversion is defined. I just think that's a really important point that sometimes gets lost because it's like, oh, we don't have that end conversion right away. Well,
Mm.
we'll get there.
One of the things that these marketing automation systems are really good at doing, of course, is the scoring aspect. So where years ago it used to be, in the old days of email blasting, it was like the purpose of the email was to get somebody to say, yeah, I'm interested right now, which of course, as Kevin mentioned, that is definitely what we want them to do. But there's so much more that can be gained by what their actions are
Hmm.
if you give them more than just that one option. So the one option is, yeah, here's Chris's email, send him an email. Here's Chris's appointment book, book it. We want them to do that. But if they're not going to do that, we also want to be able to see if they take that other link and go to the website and have a look and take a look at, here and there. This gives you the chance to really define the different sort of types of customers that are in your audience so that you can streamline those further journeys, and so that it's not the end of the day if the client doesn't book a meeting with Chris right away, if it's going to take some time, or that might not be just the right time to book that meeting, but you want to pick up on if there's any other sort of activities that the client has sort of gotten themselves involved in that indicates the fact that there is some interest there. So I would say more often than not, what we're doing with organizations that have these platforms that are deploying some of these types of tactics, fine tuning that middle of funnel sort of discussion. So bottom of funnel, no worries there. We know what to do with them. Middle of funnel, that's where it gets a little bit more interesting, where we need to have more information that the system and what the client is doing, putting their hand up here, putting their hand up there, to sort of indicate where they are interested, so that we can shape up the communication with them appropriately.
I love that point, Chris, because when you're building out the journey, you're sort of mapping all these actions and reactions that happen within a somewhat defined path, but there are actions that happen outside. And it's important not to miss those clues, those website visits, anything else that can happen outside the structure of the journey that are going to give you a read or an indication on how those customers are engaging with you. And again, back to the data point, that's an additional data point that you can then leverage as you go back and say, okay, what's next with this group?
When we talk about journeys, though, I think sometimes sometimes individuals can say, well, we're just kind of really narrowly focused on, these 3 emails, these 5 emails, whatever, but that doesn't mean other things can't be happening in concert with those, right? And whether it's sales reach outs that are somewhat complementary to the message in these emails, whether it's, I don't know, digital advertising and targeting on various right suited platforms like a LinkedIn, or possibly like retargeting efforts, whatever, like these are all valid and sort of support of the nurtures too. But I do see a lot of, we're just focusing on emails, and that's a big part of it, but it certainly isn't the only part, Chris, to your point. And then the tracking really becomes even more important at that point. Sorry, Mike, I know you were going to talk.
No, it's fine. I think I was like, just sort of tune mine a little bit to what you were talking about there. I think the journey, you've mapped it out, and these outcomes are good in the sense that like no engagement here, a little bit of engagement across this one that we're doing, and then the bottom of the funnel, we know how to handle it. I think 2 things. One thought is that to your point, Robin, we don't want to just throw that pile that no engagement out. We spent a lot of money on it. Even if we ran this webinar and we've got 500, 600 people to attend it, let's say, but really there's not a lot of engagement beyond that as part of our customer journey. You don't want to just throw those names out, right? So you've got, they came, there was some initial interest, we need to develop them. So there's like a program around that. And that's sort of one concept that I wanted to bring up, is I think there's a lot of focus on that bottom of the funnel, Chris, that you took an action in the email, you did something instantly, and now we're measuring the entire health of our marketing based on those bottom line outcomes. And I think the second half, what I want to say is that what I think is really difficult to do, and what we're helping clients figure out, is not only kind of how to put your programs together relative to the funnel stage and the customer journeys and having a handle on that, but more importantly, the performance side of the equation. What messaging, what content is actually moving the needle. And that, I don't think there's very many organizations that really have that down. When you say it's these messages that are actually resulting in a lower top of funnel cost per lead, or that are, once they're in that middle, the component, we found a message here that really moves them down or increases the score, to your point, Chris, like really seeing that. A lot of this stuff is still aggregate managed at the aggregate. So you're seeing kind of piled all together, and you're saying, well, we moved, broadly speaking, from all the stuff that we're doing, messaging from here to here, and we're not being able to, you're not really sort of slicing down and having accountability. Where I was going to go is accountability on the marketing team for those messages, for that content. I still think there's so many organizations that are struggling with framing this up and getting the infrastructure in place, that the light has been shined on the infrastructure and getting the right types of journeys mapped out and getting the right, getting this things into the CRM in a way that everybody can manage it. There hasn't been a light on, well, we have all that now, and we want better performance of the actual content, better performance of the messaging that we're putting out, something that actually does everything possible to move the needle, that doesn't just find the 10% needle in haystack type of thing that's going to go drop to the bottom of the funnel. Right, Kev?
So that's a great point too, because where I'm going to go is sort of the analysis of initial performance. That doesn't really get talked about a lot. So usually the big effort, if you will, is sort of let's get this nurture campaign off the ground, and that's a win for a lot of organizations because historically they haven't had that. So hey, that's great. I don't want to take away from that, but most of us don't get the first guess right every time. And
Mhm.
so what the that initial build is, it's a win in that you have this new collection of assets and engagement paths or nurture campaign or journey, but it's probably not perfect, and you're going to learn, and then you're going to incrementally improve. And Robin, that was sort of your point before, but then what's kind of lost in that is the review of, you know, round one analysis. Was that message strong enough? We really thought it was. We put a lot of effort and thoughtful dialogue around why we thought the audience would really resonate with this message. But hey, it didn't work. So now what? And I find I go back into these engagements with a lot of our clients and say, you know, for whatever reason, this just didn't land. And maybe we just need to refine how we communicated that value prop, or maybe we're learning that value prop just doesn't stick and we've got to move on. And I think people are a bit sensitive to that. And it's not meant to go and sort of unearth all sorts of, oh, well, this isn't a good job or anything like that. But I think it's, you're getting real time feedback as to what you thought the right message was. In some cases, it doesn't land, and it's an opportunity to understand that in somewhat real time and say, okay, well, what's the pivot from here? And it can be big and it might not be big, but I find the analysis component, Mike, of what you're saying is often lacking, because it's like, we just climbed this mountain, we've got a nurture campaign. Boom. Right?
Yeah, and it probably was a big climb.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it is a big win, but it's certainly like their journey has just begun, so to speak.
You know, Kev, as you're talking about, you know, maybe the message didn't resonate, right? It wasn't the value proposition, but for every message, there's multiple channels and there's multiple formats for that message.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not necessarily that, but maybe it's something that's more effective on LinkedIn versus Facebook. Maybe it's a video versus a checklist. So it makes it more complex, but it also gives you more opportunities for testing before saying no, this is the wrong message. It doesn't resonate with the base that we're trying to engage with.
Yeah. And I find like one sort of common theme that I've seen across dozens and dozens of organizations of their nurture campaigns and a wide variety of industries and kinds of audiences. Your audience doesn't know you as well as you think they do. Meaning, like, to be high level is okay. To reinforce like the highest of core value props is okay. Like, we don't need to jump right into the nitty gritties of why your API is a differentiator. Like, it's like that'll come. But first, talk about the organization, the high level challenges and pain points that you solve. I think people's inboxes are just bombarded with all kinds of noise. And I forgot the email I got this morning, and I don't think high level is a bad thing. And you may want to look at it like, well, we have a roadmap of several journeys we want to put our audiences through. The first is, let's get to know you. And then the second one can be, all right, this is kind of what we're all about under the hood, right? But I think that's a really good point, Robin.
Yeah. So I think the what I'm hearing is there's a climb to get your initial journeys up and running. You know, it's depending on your marketing organization, you might be in a situation where the team's sort of born all that out and you're almost kind of married to that process because it's came out of that team, right? And then all of a sudden the team changes and you're back from zero again. But so that's one component where organizations are trying to lay all this out and get their customer journeys in place, and multi-step journeys in terms of, like, you know, like you said, what happens when this one ends? Where does it go from here? And thinking strategically about that. But then the other side of it is that it sounds to me like we have to be accelerating both the journey creation side of it as well as the content kind of iteration, if you want to call it content iteration. Robin, you're touching on, you know, the various types of content or ways in which to communicate the content, video, et cetera, versus long form and all that. You know, I think so much of what I'm hearing is that people can't even get the basics out the door and get it done in a coordinated effort, let alone be able to say, you know what, we're going to start slicing off iterations of this to try to improve. I think that that's a huge problem in marketing, and we're helping solve that as an agency that can plug in, and take bandwidth off and say, well, we'll do the testing, we'll do the iteration work, we'll put another one in, because you guys are already just trying to manage your product marketing, to the level that you already have it. But as an overall kind of challenge within the, I guess maybe more, I think it's probably broadly marketing, but certainly in B2B that we're seeing, that can't be overlooked, just in terms of the amount or the speed in which we should be moving at a lot of this stuff, right?
I think so. Like the other thing is like, so the whole question we're posing on this particular podcast episode is the now what, right? You've done one journey. I think marketers, we cannot be precious about trying to communicate an entire story in one journey. You can't, you won't, and you actually shouldn't. And I think what would be a good thing to do for marketers is to have some sort of Google Keep note or Evernote or wherever your notepad and just kind of, what are the kinds of single theme stories you think you'd like to tell to parts of your audience or your entire audience, because that in itself will become a journey. So it doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can really just be one slice of the value your organization brings, but you're going to be perpetually running journeys. That's just the state of digital business today and digital engagement and digital communications. So I think that's fine. So, we want to have like an education session on why it is we're really good at these services. Great. Well, that sounds like another 3 to 5 emails. Perfect. Because we're going to be continually engaging audiences until those audiences are ready to take a sales meeting, and then we'll run that process effectively. But a majority of your audience probably isn't immediately searching today for that solution. So some of this is top of mind. And if it's done with some thoughtful effort and it's sort of, I don't know, collaborative with the rest of your marketing messages overall, then it's going to be a net win. The audience just isn't ready for that next step yet. So we'll continue to engage and nurture and just genuinely educate as we need to. But that's sort of my big thing is, let's think about this in sort of piecemeal, right? You can't just kind of blow it out of the park with one solid swing at the bat and then you're done.
Chris, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just the one other thing because on the point that Kevin's making about you've got this journey and sort of what happens after that journey is done. Well, because we do so much with B2B, we know that a lot of the solutions that we are assisting our organizations, our client organizations in putting out there, marketing and sort of engaging their audiences, there's multiple decision makers at the table. When you think about some of these business solutions that we're helping our clients get out there, it's like, it's not just one person, I don't know, like buying a pair of shoes. We've got like there's a multiple different people that are at the table that are contributing to that discussion. You might not be getting that person to engage beyond a particular place because there are other individuals at the organization that need to be sort of brought into that discussion as well. So you start to sort of see how it is that that one or two marketing journeys are going to maybe warm up to a point, but you do need that ongoing sort of strategy in the middle of funnel to branch out beyond that one person you have the contact with. The funniest thing it's frustrating too. We've got these general marketing ideas where it's like, I need to generate like 200 MQLs per month. And I totally understand why that's an important metric to have. But then what? It's like, now that you've got the MQL, what does that actually mean? What is that, like, how is that helpful? Right?
And is there an unlimited amount of, I know, and it's like, is there an unlimited amount of MQLs you could ever generate? What happens when you turn over all the stones?
Maybe not. Yeah, but
it's like, so that, I guess my point is that there's like, there is an important metric in the amount of opens and the sort of the level of engagement that you have, but a lot of those are going to be like one and dones unless you have that next sort of that next step in the journey sort of set up. And if you're a B2B provider of services, you've got to really understand how it is that those purchases are made. Because if your purpose is in growing your business, you've got to figure out how that whole thing works. Because you could have one person at a table in a sales meeting. It's not going to do the job. You might again advance the conversation, but you're going to need to have like that engagement is really going to have to be more than just that one individual.
Yeah. So I think we'll move to wrap this up unless Robin wants to weigh in, but I did want to say one last thing, and then you might want to weigh in. It's up to you. But something that I was going to bring up, and then you mentioned this briefly too, Kev, is that the journeys that are being developed here and how they're being moved into nurture streams and connected points, et cetera, we're all making this hypothesis on how we should be introducing our organization to these contacts, right? But I think what's true is what you said, is that they're not all looking for your solution on the time that they engage your email or they originally engage your business, right? They're not looking. And that goes back to kind of that whole, solution selling mantra that, there's only so many people in the market that are budget qualified that are actually looking. And it's like, how do you address the larger portion of that pie, whether it's however big you think it is, 90%, 80% of the rest of your audience? They're not ready yet. So I think that, being able to measure those engagements and another thing you said was being able to track, the number of engagements per, before you make a sale, and just data that helps you better understand that, as a marketer, it's okay that we're having a big base of these organizations that are continuously nurtured through these journeys, recognizing that they're not all going to drop out. They may not even all become SQL within the period that we would absolutely like. But, that last deal that we closed, it actually had, 13 engagement points before they became a customer, for example. And that's an area of improvement that I think a lot of organizations have, is sort of drawing those parallels back to the business. So we just spent all this money to build this audience, got all of it in place now. We only did X number of deals. Yeah, you're talking about clicks and opens in this middle of funnel nurturing, but what is that actually doing for us? Let's just go buy another pile of audience and go do the next campaign and drop out the bottom. So just wanted to add that in, that this concept that they're not all ready. And if you can measure, your thriving overall base of contacts and respondents as people that are continuously engaging your content and through your customer journeys, then, and be able to show what the impact is on sales, then that'll make it a lot easier to sort of continuously run these programs, right? And communicate to the business. Nice place to end that off.
Let's do it.
Right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Bye,
guys.